All right, guys, today we're gonna find out how to get a thick back. Thick with all capitals. If you're looking for a different punctuation or not all capitals, go to some other video because this is just specifically for a thick back with all caps. What is this video gonna give you? We're gonna define first and foremost, what is a thick back? Obviously, people use this type of language. I'm gonna clarify what I think that means, and based off of obviously everyone I've worked with, what they tell me from visual feedback and just general consensus, although this stuff is just made up. So again, it can technically mean something different for everybody. Then we're gonna get into, once we define that, specifically what muscles that makes up, how do we train those most efficiently and effectively, and I'm gonna give you sample workouts. So we're gonna go through, if I had a specialization where I wanted to bring up my back thickness, what would I do that, or what would that look like from a programming standpoint? And hopefully Under Armour reaches out to me because they're on my YouTube page now. So this is going to be a big break for them, getting some extra exposure. So yeah, that's my underwear. It's hopefully not inappropriate. It's not appropriate when you talk, inappropriate when we talk about muscles, right? So what muscles make up a thick back? Again, some of this could just be a little bit of a matter of opinion, but for keeping this super duper simple, we're talking erectors, traps, and then I kind of have a little bit of a category of everything else. You know, erectors for the most part, first off, we're gonna play a game. We're gonna play a game called Where Do Joe's Traps Start and Where Do His Erectors Start? Or vice versa. I don't really know. It just looks like one big giant trap. Look at this one. There's some traps, traps, traps. Where does it turn into erectors? I don't know. I'm supposed to know about anatomy and stuff. Sometimes there's a little bit more of a clear line in there. Just looks like some, either I have very long traps or very long erectors, and I got this on the screen and I can't get it off. There we go, I got it. So give me your feedback in the comments below. Where do they start? Where do they stop? What's going on there? But erectors, hopefully, is pretty much everything that goes all along your spine. And so there is basically some overlap where there's gonna be more deep erector tissue kind of below your traps. And really I would call anything that are erectors, things that run along your spine, and when they concentrically contract, they perform spinal extension. So you literally have meat all the way along. It's arguably definitely the thickest where it's along kind of the lumbar portion of your spine. So these two slabs of meat that go along your, pretty much right along your spine are erectors. And then obviously at some point in time as we get up top, you know, then it's really talking about traps, which have some function, again, to actually work in spinal extension, but their main job is to control and manipulate the scapula. And so one, obviously, if you want a thick back, this is what you want it to look like, hopefully, except even thicker. You know, look at someone like Jordan Peterson, not looking at my back, but a relatively thick back with your shirt off. But I also put this picture too, because a lot of people, when I'm talking to like normal people that don't plan on getting on a stage in their underwear, they just want to look like they have a thick back and a shirt. And so that's why I kind of have a little bit of everything else for this kind of like meat look up there. Is it's a combination of traps, but there's some other stuff up there too, where you can actually even throw a little bit of like rear delts, some kind of more deep stuff, some rhomboid type stuff, even some rotator cuff stuff. So all that will get worked a little bit as well too. That's what I kind of just call the everything else. We don't really need to get too technical, but for all intents and purposes, thick back muscles are erectors and traps, and then some other upper back stuff. So how do we train those? So what exercises best accomplish this? And as always, this is gonna be a little bit of a balance of evidence-based from what the nerds say and evidence-based from what I've seen in actual practicality, in actual application. Because the only place where this is really kind of something kind of unique was it goes in for erectors. I absolutely have to say the number one exercise is going to be a deadlift variation. And we'll go into the different variations, which ones you should pick, what they bring to the table. From a science-based standpoint, it seems pretty clear that normal concentric, eccentric style training, so if I'm gonna train biceps, I generally don't grab a dumbbell and just hold it here as long as I can. Although that would produce intramuscular force, I guarantee it could produce some hypertrophy. It does seem best to do it traditional, you know, concentric, eccentric style training. I would argue I've never seen the thickest pair of deadlifts ever from someone that didn't do particularly deadlifts. And some people I've known, again, based on what their anecdotal feedback is, have never actually trained their erectors with spinal flexion and extension. So again, I don't know if this is just something because this is the way it's always been done, but even when I combine both, or again, some sort of basically, I say that isometric because when you're doing a deadlift, you know, the hip is the prime mover, the hip is the joint getting the most torque, but your erectors are basically performing a really strong isometric the whole time, peaking at whatever the bottom is, that are basically preventing you from going further into flexion. So if you keep it completely fixed, you are preventing going into flexion, or you might have a tiny bit of flexion extension as you're going through the motion as well. So Deadlifts, absolutely, in my opinion, are the must-have for thick erectors. And like I said, my definition of thick, where it looks like somebody could like stab you in the back with a little knife and you'd survive, like that's my definition of thick. To actually have those slabs, I've never seen someone actually have that look without significantly, without being able to deadlift significant amount of weight. Upper back, I just say an upper back row. An upper back row just meaning something where your arms can pass comfortably at your side, and the main focus is on your shoulder blades, not your upper arm path. So if we're doing more of a lat biasing row, we might be more concerned about what the lat can do with the upper arm and the positions that's best for that. But if we're doing an upper back style row, the focus really should be how much do your shoulder blades move. Like I said, I think the combination for erectors that absolutely works best is prioritizing deadlifts, but still including low back extensions as well. So training them traditionally with that flexion extension type stuff. And then shrug variations. So again, the difference between this and upper back rows, depending on genetics, same as everything else, when you do an upper back row, every single part of your traps is working because upper traps and lower traps will actually work together to pull things into retraction as well too. And of course, the mid traps are the ones in direct opposition of wherever your load is pulling. If it's pulling this way, mid traps are generally in direct opposition. They're going to get the most work, but they all kind of work together. And so that's why some people can really get huge, well-developed all-around traps just doing rows and don't really need to bias kind of a high row or a low row or do any shrug variations. But the same as any other muscle group, some people are going to want more isolated work for those as well too. So you might want to bias more upper, more lower, and we'll talk about that because shrug variations can be a very good thing for this. So this is my list of basically categories of what are the best exercises or the best types of exercise to accomplish that thick back look. So deadlift variations. I'm going to go through this one pretty quick. We have the traditional deadlift variation. You guys can pause it and count the plates. There's 6 on there. That's right, kind of a big deal. So there's traditional deadlifts. There are RDL style or stiff leg. Not going to get into the difference on that because people that have no muscle can argue about the difference between a Romanian and stiff leg. And then we have something that would be, I didn't spend a whole lot of research, but something like a block pull or a rack pull. Something where you're essentially limiting the range of motion to just the top. So short story, and I'll elaborate and draw some pictures in a little bit. I think the absolute best variation, best meaning most efficient, again, for load on the bar, is going to be an RDL variation or stiff leg if you just want to argue about that. The main goal, this will sum up all of it, so if you don't care about deadlifts past this point, take this home. Whatever gets your spine closest to, and ideally, well, let's get a pen, and ideally parallel to the ground is where you're going to be in the most taxing position, not only for your hips, but also for all of your erectors. That's when the moment arm from a given load will be the longest it's capable of being. And in this case, so this is the line of force here. So if we're actually looking at the moment arms, we could draw every individual joint here. This isn't all of them. And that's basically say all the joints of your vertebra that your erectors are managing. And it's this distance here, those distance to each individual joint, I'm kind of drawing it off the joint, is the moment arm. So again, doesn't matter how you do it, the higher up you get, which I'll show in a minute, the shorter those moment arms will get, which means less joint torque. So again, if you want peak joint torque for all of your erectors, which would mean peak tension or peak force production from your erectors, you want a deadlift variation that at the bottom gets your spine closest to parallel to the ground. And so again, typically, it doesn't matter really what's going on with the knee. That plays a small factor because what this looks like from here below will be slightly different from person to person. Someone could have a little bit more knee bend and still be in that position. Someone could have that knee almost completely straight and get in that position. Don't really worry what's going on with the lower body. Just worry about what gets you in that position. And that really should be the goal. Again, is the spine relative to the ground, perpendicular relative to the ground. So it should be relatively clear what can happen with the other variations. Where is the other one? So on this variation, at the bottom position, right around there, we have the line of force. And again, if we're looking at all those individual joints, if I took and compared those two side to side, the line of force, the moment arms all dotted, so it looks different than the straight line, than the force from the bar. Those moment arms to every single joint, if I looked at all the exact same positions, will be shorter. So this is one of the reasons why you can do more load this way. But again, to produce the same amount of joint torque, you'll need more load. What else is happening here as well? If I have more hip flexion, which I do, arguably you have more of this stuff, you have more glutes and adductors. And if I have more knee flexion, I'm gonna have more of knee stuff, quads. So there's a whole efficiency one where how can I use a weight where the most of it is going to the goal of training erectors? That's gonna be in a position again where that spine is parallel to the ground. And also, how can I have other less muscles and less joints involved? Now, when I go back to, someone's gonna say, which I will clarify, when I go back to here, yes, if we're looking at all the joints involved, the hip joint, this is still the largest moment arm. So that means technically your hips are the main movers and they're producing the most joint torque. All that being said, the whole goal here is to produce a very strong isometric challenge at your erectors, and that's still the best position. So this one will have a little bit less range of motion, a little bit less range of motion at the hip. Well, you kind of get the hip, didn't draw that perfect, but you're gonna have less range of motion, a less closed hip than you would with a conventional deadlift, but you still have a ridiculously high joint torque challenge at the hip as well too. So I'm not saying that this variation is gonna be less hip involvement, but it's gonna be a less lengthened glute, less lengthened adductor, and obviously a lot less knee involvement. And then if we go to the racks, what's the idea of the rack deadlift? Well, I don't say that these are a completely bad exercise. Obviously, I was doing them at some point in time. What do you really is the goal here? By limiting the range of motion, you're gonna be able to do more load because you're not having your hips or your erectors really be the limiting factor. But what else do we have going on at the top here? We have upper traps essentially connecting, not essentially, they are connecting. Here's our shoulder blade floating around here. Upper traps are connecting that all through here. And literally your upper trap's main job at this point in time is to prevent your scapula and in turn upper arm from ripping off of your body. That would be sad. Blood everywhere, blood. Ah! And that's literally their main function. So the traps are working tremendously there, again, producing an isometric. Now the trade-off here, the big thing is I've got, 6 plates and some change on there, and all that still has everything else working. So that's the idea, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth all the other fatigue and tax? I don't know. I'll let you guys decide for that. The nerds would say it's definitively not. I would say it depends on the individual, depends on your recovery. And there have been plenty of times in my program where I was able to tolerate that. And I honestly think this is when my, upper trap area looked the best, was always including some sort of rack deadlift or block deadlift as well too. But I'll let you guys make your own decisions on that. Unless you go out and go tag some nerds and get their opinion, and it can be your opinion since that's what we do on the internet these days. Upper back rows. So here's just a variation. My top pick here is just chest supported row. And so the main reason here is you don't want, if we're doing RDLs, that for the goal of maximally taxing erectors, if we do anything without a chest support after this time, so if I'm just doing a chest supported row, how much is Terrence doing here? It's a lot. He's really strong. He's probably stronger than you, but it's still probably a lot less than you can RDL or deadlift. So if you're going off the pad, it's not gonna be taxing enough for your erectors to really grow because it's so far below capacity of what they can do. But it still might take away actually from your output of what you can do from your upper back. It still is gonna have a lot of fatigue on your hips and fatigue on your erectors that you don't need. So the chest support basically allows you just to press into that while this load is pulling you this way. And obviously then the chest support pushes back this hard, you don't move. But the chest support allows you to maximally tax your upper back while not having any additional fatigue for your hips and your erectors. And then the main goal of the upper back row is take a grip which generally will be wider, can really be anything where your upper arm generally is going about 80 degrees relative to your body to 45 degrees, and then keep the idea of just maximum scapular motion. So on the way out, maximally let them protract, initiate with retraction, kind of really one smooth motion, honestly, and focus on retracting as far as you can. At some point in time, same as every other muscle group, even though it's not as dramatically weaker at the top for a lot of reasons as more of like a lat row, you're still gonna be a little bit weaker in that fully retracted position, just from a length tension standpoint. So don't worry about obviously getting all the way up and all the way pulled back every single rep. On a really, really hard set, you wanna get that full lengthen, retract as far as you can, and then when it stops, it stops. You may be able to get additional reps just kind of in that bottom half of range motion, which I think is a good strategy. So doesn't have to be a T-bar, could be anything that's this, anything with a chest support, any type of machine that just allows your upper arm to move freely and allows your shoulder blades to move a lot. And this is a little bit of that everything else type thing, so I always visualize here because again, your traps can't move your upper arm. So this is gonna be a lot of rear delt and literally everything from shoulder joint to shoulder joint and everything in between is kind of what I visualize, when I'm doing this type motion. And again, I didn't say that without a chest pad is bad. Like when I train, sometimes I train in my garage now. I don't always go to a gym. I don't have a good chest supported row, so I'll just do bent over T-bar rows. The idea is not looking at things as good or bad, just being aware of obviously the difference and what potentially could be limitations. For me now, just trying to get some upper back and some erectors and just be kind of, look good for being a dad. It's fine, but if my goal was Terrence or when I used to compete and have my upper back as huge as humanly possible, I'd make sure that I got to a gym where I could have a chest supported row so I could have maximum stimulus on that upper back musculature without additional fatigue or potential limiting factor from hips or erectors. Next one we got is low back extensions. And so the big thing with low back extensions is we realize we want to look at the hip joint. So if you're setting this up, here's her pelvis in here somewhere, block the hip crease. So basically, obviously her hip crease will be somewhere basically, you know, within the side of that pelvis. So basically flexion can occur here. If she bent her knee, it would go here. So block your hip crease, because we want to make sure as she goes through this range of motion, if we could visualize her pelvis in there, make sure it doesn't move and make sure that all of the motion comes from maximal flexion. So I would say she's doing a good job there. If we look at where her spine is, clearly very flexed, which is the goal. And then from there, we're going to go all the way up into extension. Extend, 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 extend. And I'm telling her to take it all the way up. And if you look here, if again, her hip joint is right there, there's no motion. I know the camera's moving, so that was me not really making sure we didn't have a camera that wasn't moving, but you guys get the idea. If we look here and you look back to where I had that, her pelvis is still in pretty much the exact same spot. And all the range of motion came from what? Extension, 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 pretty much right up through that point. So if we looked at where she was at the bottom to where she was at the top, huge range of motion coming from all of those vertebrae, making a collective motion of your spine. So technically, you know, every single vertebral, I don't know if that's the right word, nerds can yell at me, articulation in there is a joint. And so all of it comes from the sum of all of them flexing, all of it extending. And again, I can't make an argument for why you wouldn't want to include that in your programming. You know, so yes, maximally tax it with a ridiculous amount of torque at the bottom of an RDL, but still train it more traditionally, concentrically, and eccentrically as well too. So that's that. You guys got it? Block hips, motion just from spine, full flexion, full extension, load it the same as everything else. And I borrowed John here, thanks John, to show some shrug variations. So he's showing, yeah, Kelso shrugs, I always forget that. But any type of shrug variation is gonna be a good option. Maybe I'll show this but the other way around, but using John, don't overcomplicate this. So if we can see, because John's got bigger traps than I do, so let's use his traps anyway. We've got some trap meat that's basically kind of a triangle-ish type thing. So if he's doing this Kelso type shrug, what really is this? This is somewhere right in between a perfect horizontal pull and a vertical pull. And so you don't have to look anything. Look at where the line of force is. And if you use enough load, you could do this exact same thing with dumbbells or cables or whatever. So even though he's on a machine, don't freak out. But this is pulling this way. So if this is pulling straight this way, what does this pass through? So just look at where his arm points, and it passes through that tissue. So again, from a traditional shrug that's straight upright, it's obviously gonna pass more through those upper trap tissue. This kind of goes in between, somewhere between the middle and somewhere between those upper. Now, if his arm was down here at his side, let's not get too much stuff going on here, but if his arm was down here at his side and he was pulling with a load right in this direction, what would that pass through? You got it, more through, right, through that upper trap meat. And again, don't get too nerding of what's technically the upper traps and what you can visually see from the front is what I'm gonna refer to as upper traps, the upper portion where there's the majority of trap meat. Now again, if he took his arm straight out here like you would see with a row, so whether it's a row or an isolated shrug, what would this pass through? If I draw John's massive traps on there again, this passes right through basically the middle of his traps. And if we went in all these directions, that's gonna be more mid or lower. And if he did something almost more like a vertical isolated depression, like this motion, that's obviously gonna bias a little bit more lower traps. So any type of shrug variation for where you need more isolated stimulus. So like I said, what's the difference from trap involvement if he does an isolated shrug this way or he does a row? So from trap involvement, what's the difference between me doing a row or me doing just a shrug from a trap standpoint? Almost nothing. Still traps, but you're taking out a lot of other limiting factors. So the elbow's not involved, the rear delt's not involved again, because remember, your traps don't move your upper arm, they only move your shoulder blades. So that's the idea of having a shrug variation, is more isolated stimulus to a muscle that you're trying to train, again, without as much fatigue coming along. So again, if you want some part of your traps to get thicker or to grow and get more direct stimulus with less fatigue, you know, without having to go through all the other stuff involved, I can't see a reason not to have some sort of shrug variation. And so again, what type, honestly, I can make the argument for anytime you have a little bit of a wider arm position is probably better. So if you had a traditional shrug with a ton of weight right at your side, straight up and down, might be a little bit better if you had a little bit of a wider grip. So cables can be good, even like a trap bar could be a little bit better. And same thing for anything that you do. The same reason I think it's a little bit better to have a grip out here when you row. Like I wouldn't say the best way to row is here, right? So why would you shrug here? So if I say this is the best grip for rowing, any of those variations, I think that width is a good position. So again, more upper traps, mid traps, lower traps, and anywhere that you want to get in between. Don't overthink it. Again, people make up names for stuff like this. I don't know who Kelso is. Good job, buddy, but he's the first person apparently to shrug in this direction. I find that hard to believe, but okay. So for every little degree in here, so he's got this one, so Kelso's got this, but I don't think anyone's called dibs on this, or this, or this, or this, or this, or this. So we got a few hundred options in there, so you guys in the comment section just divide that up amongst yourselves and name it after you for some social media clout. So here's me giving you the goods, because a lot of people don't want to know stuff about why and how do I do it and train hard. Just tell me what to do on paper. If I literally thought about this for a little bit, if somebody said, hey, I want to work on my back thickness, you know, what would I do? And so don't overcomplicate. Should you do one or should you do two? I don't know your life. I don't know what you've got going on, man. I don't know how your workouts look, what your recovery is. So here's just some options and you make the best decision. If someone's gonna do a one workout, so maybe you're more of a bro split, you got one back day in your split, this is how I would put it. Why would I start with chest supported rows? I don't know. I can honestly probably interchange these and I could go back and forth on it for a while. So, you know, I can make the argument always that RDLs are more taxing and fatiguing, so you want to be fresh and start with them first. But from an aesthetic standpoint, again, because there's so much hip involvement as well too, sometimes I found with people it works better to still prioritize the more meaty upper back stuff. But again, I'll leave that up to you. I just wanted to hear my thought process on that. But obviously doing a row of, you're gonna do row variations, you're gonna train a little bit of lat stuff as well too. We're clearly just going by what starts first is probably the absolute best way to prioritize something in a workout. So chest supported T-bar row is a great option for upper back, a horrible option for lats. So we put it there. Then one way or another, we're going erectors. So top two things, traps, erectors, prioritize them in the workout. Then we get some lats going in there. Neutral grip anything, don't overthink it. Neutral grip pull up, cool. Neutral grip machine, cool. Neutral grip cable, cool. Oh look, I can do one arm at the same time. Like I don't understand, this is the nerds on the internet, or like the meatheads will say, neutral grip pull-ups, awesome, manly. And then it's like, oh, neutral grip hammer strength, pull down, manly. But God forbid you just do one arm at a time, all of a sudden now you're an optimal nerd. Well, as far as this arm, this joint, and this lat's concerned, it's all the same thing. So whatever, you guys argue about that as well too. Neutral grip pull down or pull up. Do a cable if you're a nerd, do a pull up if you're manly. Make sure you make fun of each other while you're doing them and tag them. Low back extensions, again, because all those main categories I'm gonna make sure that I hit in here. Low fatigue, so I'll still put them more towards the end. Shrug variation there, and then I would do one more lat row. Lat row meaning something that's more this arm path, where the goal is to really tax the lats more through their mid and kind of shorten range. Not like a necessity, but I don't think six exercises is excessive. I would consider this a very complete back workout. So if you want a complete back work, there you go, you're welcome. And this is just obviously prioritizing by sequence more of your back thickness stuff. Now the benefit of potentially breaking up, a little less volume within the workouts. So in general, a little less volume. Volume and intensity always have an inverse relationship. So everything will have a little bit higher of intensity. If I was gonna have two, I would always start one with RDLs because these are near interchangeable like I showed here. Well, why wouldn't I start one with RDLs and start one with chest supported T-bar row? You'll see here, if you have the same variations, there's a couple strategies here you don't have to, but you could do an A and a B where there's double up. Did I put it the same place? So you could do the exact same chest supported row if you're doing back twice within your rotation. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But this could be a good opportunity if you like an A-B rotation to have two different chest supported rows. Same thing where we have, where was I gonna put the other variation? I don't know if I have another variation there. Oh, I was gonna say, why don't I have RDLs in there twice? RDLs are very taxing, assuming you're doing some sort of squat pattern in your workout there as well too. You know, that might be a reason not to have all of that stuff to recover from, but it's not like something that couldn't happen. If your recovery is really, really great, you could actually do an A-B rotation of a deadlift. And I've done that before, RDL one day, something more like a rack deadlift the other day. I know the nerds are gonna chastise me for that, but it is what it is. Your recovery is good, have at it. So I have a day that's pretty much all upper back stuff, 100%. So you can see it's just all my main categories pretty much in order. Again, just starting with the most fatiguing to the least fatiguing. And then here we have another day where there's still a lot of upper back focus, but I put a little bit more lat stuff in there as well too. So again, if the goal is to prioritize something realistically in a split, you just want a little bit more volume allocated to the thing you're trying to bring up, and a little bit less volume for other things, just with the idea that it will grow at a slightly faster rate. So there's your program, you're welcome. And as always, hopefully all that kind of stuff helps. So going through obviously what's a thick back, what are the best exercises, what's a program look like. If I miss something or you have questions about it, don't hesitate to hit me down below in the comment section. And as always, don't forget to do the YouTube thing. I appreciate all the positive feedback you guys are giving me, liking the video, liking my obnoxiously massive board, which I love for getting to draw pictures for you guys. If there's stuff, this came from, originally was gonna be a Q&A. Somebody asked about how to get a thick back. And I was like, man, this is kind of a beast of a question. Let's just turn it into its own video. So if you guys have questions and stuff you wanna see, hit them in the comments. If you see stuff that you wanna see, give it a little thumbs up, because that's how I pick stuff. And also, if you wanna support the channel in other ways, look in the description down below, try my app. It is full of programs that I go through this much thought process for every single body part for how I put them together. This is all in my brain. This is all comes out. It all comes out in my programs. You can have one-on-one support from me in the app as well too. Exercise library, a whole bunch of nerd information, and all that good stuff as well too. But for everyone else just here for free stuff, I love you too. And I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.